The valley was quiet that morning, but not in a peaceful way. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something wild and untamed was watching from the shadows. For weeks, whispers had traveled through the small town at the edge of the mountains. A Mustang unlike anyone had seen, one that no rider had ever tamed, prowling the cliffs and hidden meadows, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. Locals called her the Phantom of the Valley, a creature both feared and admired, a living storm wrapped in fur. I first heard about her the moment I arrived, bags in hand, hoping for a fresh start at the caretaker ranch I'd just accepted a position at. "She's dangerous," said the old rancher, his hands trembling as he gestured toward the hills. "She'll throw you, she'll bite, she'll vanish. And mark my words, she's got eyes like fire. Look into them too long, and you'll see everything you're not ready to face." The words stuck with me. There was something magnetic about the challenge, something that made me both nervous and curious. The valley had a way of revealing your own fears. As I walked along the ridge that first afternoon, the sunlight cutting through the mist in golden shafts, I felt her before I saw her. A presence, a heartbeat in the wilderness that was separate from my own. Then, from the curve of the canyon, she appeared. Hooves kicking up dust, muscles rippling under a coat that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Her mane streamed like a river of night, and her eyes told stories of survival, defiance, and a loneliness I couldn't quite place. I froze. Most people would have turned away, but something in her gaze called to me. Maybe it was the recognition of shared pain. I'd spent years running from my own ghosts, failed business ventures, fractured relationships, the constant weight of proving myself in a world that felt unforgiving. And now, here she was, a living embodiment of that same restless spirit. The connection was instant, unspoken, electric. But making a connection with a wild horse, anyone who has tried will tell you, is a dangerous gamble. My first attempt was simple, almost naive. I approached her slowly, voice low, words soft. She didn't flee, but her eyes narrowed, ears pinned, nostrils flaring. One wrong move, and I could feel the threat in the air. She wasn't just afraid, she was furious. A storm in living form. The wind seemed to whip around her as if conspiring with her, carrying the scent of the valley, of freedom, of untamed wildness. Days passed. Each attempt brought minor progress, tiny shifts, a step closer, a relaxed ear here, a lowered head there. But then came the setbacks. One morning, after a week of careful observation, I thought I had broken through. I stepped toward her, palm extended, offering calm and trust. And she reared, teeth bared, hooves landing dangerously close. My heart leapt into my throat. Pain, fear, and humiliation mixed in a bitter cocktail. And in that moment, I realized something. You can't force trust. You can't demand a wild heart to bend. You can only hope to earn it. It was at that low point, sitting alone on the ridge with the valley stretching beneath me, that I remembered something my grandmother used to say: "Some souls hear more than words, some souls hear music." The thought came almost as a whisper itself, gentle, persistent. Music. Maybe, just maybe, she would listen. I returned to the ranch, old guitar in hand, plucking soft notes under the fading light. The sound carried across the fields, mixing with the evening breeze. And then, something remarkable happened. From the shadow of the canyon, she appeared, not charging, not fleeing, but watching. Head tilted, ears forward, nostrils quivering. A shiver ran through her, and then the tiniest step forward. She was curious. And curiosity, in the wild, can be the beginning of trust. The next few hours were a delicate dance. Every note I played was measured, intentional. My fingers shook at first. I had never tried to communicate like this before. But slowly, the tension eased. Her muscles softened, eyes brightened, and I felt her heart sinking with the rhythm. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A bridge forming between two souls scarred by fear, one of them human, one of them entirely untamed. By the end of that first evening, she allowed me to approach closer than ever before. Not touching yet, not fully trusting, but close enough that I could feel the heat of her body, the raw power coiled beneath her fur, the wild spirit that had terrified everyone else in the valley. And in that closeness, I felt something else. Hope. Hope, tinged with the knowledge that the path ahead would not be easy. That the valley held secrets, and that this horse, my phantom, would test every ounce of patience, empathy, and courage I had. Every morning I returned, she grew bolder, and every misstep reminded me that control was an illusion. The story wasn't about taming her, it was about understanding her. And as I settled into that truth, I realized that the valley had chosen me just as much as I had chosen it. It's moments like these that make you want to capture everything: the beauty, the danger, the delicate balance between fear and trust. And while the camera might never fully convey the electricity in the air, the whisper of wind over hooves, the quiet heartbeat of a wild soul finally curious enough to look at you, it's worth trying. Because this story wasn't just about a horse. It was about connection, about listening, about finding the language that doesn't need words, a melody that reaches where voices cannot. And so, with the first song still echoing across the valley, the Phantom of the Valley and I began a journey neither of us could predict. A journey that would test limits, break fears, and, in the end, reveal the unbreakable bond that can exist between a human and a creature of wild, untamed heart. The next morning, the valley was cloaked in mist. A thin veil of fog curled around the cliffs, softening the jagged edges of the rocks and the wild grasses swaying under the cool breeze. I carried the guitar again, my fingers still sore from yesterday's practice, but my heart was lighter. Something unspoken had shifted in the Phantom. There was curiosity now, a fragile, flickering flame, but it could die in an instant. I knew that. As I rounded the ridge, there she was, silhouetted against the fog. Hooves pressed into the wet earth, steam rising from her body in the cold air. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, and I realized how much I had underestimated her intelligence. She was reading me as I read her, every twitch of a finger, every subtle movement. There was no room for mistakes. A careless glance could undo days of careful progress. I started playing, soft, trembling notes at first. Slowly, I found a rhythm, letting my heart guide the music rather than my fingers. She stepped forward cautiously, nostrils flaring, ears rotating like satellite dishes, catching every vibration. Then, almost imperceptibly, her tail stopped flicking nervously. One step closer. My breath caught. We began a ritual that would define the coming weeks, a careful dance. I would play a few notes, then wait. She would inch closer, sometimes retreat, testing boundaries. My patience was tested daily, sometimes hourly. There were moments of triumph, when she nuzzled the edge of the saddle pad I had set on a post, moments of despair, when she would bolt across the field and disappear into the mist, leaving me alone with the echoes of hooves and heartache. During those long hours, I thought about my own struggles. Life had taught me that trust was earned, and patience was a skill, not a virtue to be taken lightly. I remembered the nights I had spent staring at the ceiling, questioning every choice, every failure, every loss. And now, here, in the middle of the valley, my failures didn't matter. What mattered was this fragile connection, this living bridge between two souls that had been shaped by fear and loneliness. On the fifth day, something extraordinary happened. I had been playing, lost in the rhythm, when a sudden sound cut through the morning fog, a hawk screeching, a branch snapping under the weight of unseen wildlife. Instantly, the Phantom's body tensed. Her ears flattened, eyes wide. She bolted a few steps, panic in every muscle, ready to flee. My stomach dropped, but I froze, letting her assess the danger on her own. She paused. The music didn't stop. I let it flow steadily, confident but gentle. Slowly, the tension melted from her shoulders, her legs uncoiling like springs releasing. She looked at me again, nostrils flaring, eyes searching. And then she stayed. Not entirely relaxed, not entirely trusting, but staying. That moment felt like breaking through an invisible wall, a boundary she had built after years of fear and solitude. It was a fragile victory, but a victory nonetheless. Over the next week, she began to mirror the rhythms I played. When my fingers strummed soft, lingering chords, she would sway her head in time. When I switched to sharper, staccato notes, she would prance slightly, hooves tapping in sync. It was astonishing, this wild creature, completely untamed, responding with intuition and grace. The bond between us grew, silent yet palpable, a communication beyond words. But just as things began to feel promising, the valley threw another test. A group of ranchers came to check on the fences, their trucks rumbling through the hills. The sound was foreign, loud, and threatening. Instantly, the phantom froze, nostrils flaring, muscles taut. I knew the moment was critical. One wrong move, one loud gesture, and the fragile trust we'd built would shatter. I lowered the guitar, setting it carefully on the ground. Slowly I stepped toward her, hands open, voice soft but firm. "It's okay," I whispered, though I doubted she understood the words. My calmness became the anchor, my heartbeat, steady. Slowly, she relaxed a fraction, enough for me to gently stroke her neck. The moment lasted seconds, but it felt like hours. And in that brief contact, I realized the truth. She wasn't just responding to music, she was responding to me, my patience, my empathy, my willingness to stay despite fear and failure. That evening, I sat on the ridge, guitar across my lap, watching her graze peacefully in the twilight. The valley, which had once felt so threatening, now felt like a sanctuary. The mist curled around her legs, golden sunlight reflecting off her coat. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of awe. Not just for her beauty, but for her resilience, her intelligence, and her willingness to take the smallest step toward trust. The journey, however, was far from over. I knew the phantom spirit was not broken, nor should it be. The next challenge would be deeper: touch, grooming, leading. Every interaction had the potential to strengthen or destroy our connection. But I also knew something else. We were no longer two separate beings navigating a vast, indifferent valley. We were partners in a delicate dance, each listening, each responding, each learning. And in that shared space of patience and curiosity, I began to see something extraordinary, a glimpse of the heart beneath the wildness. She was no longer just a phantom. She was a teacher, a mirror of courage, and a reminder that trust, once earned, can transform the most guarded of souls. I glanced down at the guitar, almost afraid to play, almost afraid to break the fragile spell. Then, slowly, I let my fingers slide across the strings, letting the music flow into the evening air. The phantom lifted her head, ears alert, nostrils twitching. She stepped closer, eyes softening. And in that simple movement, I felt the first real promise that she might, someday, fully embrace the presence of a human in her world. As the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the valley in hues of orange and purple, I whispered to the camera I'd brought along, knowing viewers at home would feel this too. Sometimes, it's the smallest gestures, the softest whispers, that change everything. The phantom moved a few steps closer, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if the entire world had hushed itself to watch. The valley had a different energy that morning. Mist lingered low in the hollows, dew soaking the grasses, and every sound, the snap of a twig, the distant caw of a crow, felt amplified. The phantom was restless. She had grown used to my presence, to the music, but the moment of true trust had not yet arrived. She moved with the elegance and caution of a predator, muscles coiled, eyes sharp, nostrils quivering with every scent the wind carried. I approached slowly, guitar in hand, feeling a knot of anticipation in my stomach. This would be the day we tested the limits of our bond. Over the past 2 weeks, I had learned her rhythms, her moods, her subtle signals of curiosity versus fear. But no preparation could shield me from the unpredictability of a wild heart. The first few minutes were tentative. I played the opening notes, letting them ripple gently across the field. Her ears flicked forward, and she took a tentative step closer. Then, as if sensing my hope, she bolted. Not aggressively, not out of malice, but in a sudden surge of fear triggered by a shadow crossing the hillside. My heart leapt into my throat as I instinctively chased, but I knew better than to run after her. I stopped. Waited. Let her assess the threat. Minutes passed. I played again, this time even softer, letting the notes float through the mist. Slowly, she reappeared from the fog, hooves careful, eyes alert. And then, something extraordinary happened. She stepped forward, then froze. Her gaze locked on me, intense and unflinching. It was as if she was weighing every ounce of my intention, measuring whether I was truly safe, truly trustworthy. I held my breath. Slowly, I lowered the guitar and extended a hand. She inhaled sharply, muscles taut, then, against all odds, allowed me to touch the edge of her mane. It was electric. The hair felt like silk under my fingers, yet the power beneath her skin was undeniable. She trembled slightly, not in fear, but in that exquisite tension that comes when two beings teeter on the edge of trust. My heart swelled, but I knew the valley had more tests in store. Later that day, the Real challenge arrived. A storm rolled in unexpectedly, dark clouds swirling over the peaks, lightning flashing across the ridges, thunder rattling the earth. The Phantom panicked. She ran in tight circles, hooves pounding the wet ground, water spraying from puddles, her panic feeding off the energy of the storm. My initial instinct was to retreat, but then I remembered the lesson from before. She needed guidance, not control. I dropped the guitar, stepped into the rain, and spoke softly, letting my voice carry over the thunder. "It's okay, you're safe." Every word was deliberate, calm, unwavering. For a moment, she ignored me, ears pinned back, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she slowed. One hoof in front of the other, ears shifting, gaze flickering toward me. The storm raged around us, but in that space between lightning and thunder, a fragile bond held. As the rain fell harder, I reached for the guitar again, plucking single, deliberate notes. The sound pierced the chaos, a thread connecting us amid the storm. She halted completely, listening. Her body shifted, a subtle exhale, and for the first time, I saw trust, not complete trust, but the seed of it. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and heartbreaking all at once. I knew then that this was the moment that would define everything. Over the next hours, the storm forced us into a rhythm of patience and observation. Every approach had to be careful, every note measured, every glance intentional. I thought about the weeks leading up to this moment. The failures, the false steps, the moments of self-doubt. It all led to this fragile window, where fear could vanish with a whisper, and trust could bloom like a wildflower in the mud. Then came the twist that I hadn't anticipated. While I was momentarily distracted by adjusting a strap on the guitar, a coyote appeared, slinking along the ridge. The Phantom reacted instantly, hooves striking the ground, eyes wild, muscles coiled like springs. I froze, heart hammering. One false move could send her racing into the storm, undoing weeks of progress. But instead of running blindly, she paused, just as she had before. Her gaze flicked toward me, not with defiance, not with fear, but with a question. And then, as if recognizing my presence as an anchor, she stepped closer, her body tense but restrained. I whispered softly, fingers hovering over the strings. Slowly, she relaxed slightly, eyes softening, ears flicking forward. My pulse surged. It was the first real display of what I would later call obedient curiosity, a willingness to face fear and still acknowledge me. By the end of the storm, soaked to the bone and shivering, we had made incredible progress. She allowed me to lead her to a sheltered patch, and she grazed calmly as the rain pelted around us. The valley, once intimidating, now felt intimate, almost sacred. I realized that the wildest Mustang I had ever met had not just survived the storm, she had learned to trust through it. Sitting there, watching her mane glisten with rain, I felt a profound mix of emotions: relief, awe, admiration, and something deeper, a recognition that the bond between us was now unshakable. She had tested every boundary I had, every ounce of patience, every fiber of courage, and had chosen to step forward anyway. That night, as I strummed the guitar under a sheltering tree, I whispered to the viewers I imagined at home, "Sometimes, the greatest victories are quiet, measured in moments of trust, not triumphs of control." The Phantom grazed nearby, ears twitching at the soft chords. She no longer saw me as a threat, and while fear remained, a necessary part of her wild spirit, it was no longer a wall. And yet, I knew the journey wasn't over. Trust could be fragile, easily broken by carelessness or misjudgment. Tomorrow we would face new challenges, grooming, touch beyond the briefest strokes, perhaps even the first attempt at leading her beyond the paddock. But for the first time, I believed we could do it. She believed in me as much as I believed in her. The next morning, the valley was drenched in gold. Sunlight pierced through the lingering mist, painting the hills in warm hues, as if the world itself was celebrating what was about to unfold. The phantom moved in the distance, grazing cautiously, but her eyes caught mine immediately, alert, curious. The storm had passed, but the memory of it lingered in her every muscle. Today, I knew we would attempt something monumental. The step beyond observation, the step into connection. I approached slowly, hands empty at first, letting her read every movement. She watched, nostrils flaring, tail flicking cautiously. I whispered softly, letting the notes of my guitar echo across the valley, not in grand chords, but in gentle, tentative melodies. She tilted her head, ears forward, listening. Her body language spoke volumes. The wall between us was still there, but cracks had formed. She was listening, truly listening, and perhaps considering. I reached the edge of the paddock where she stood and sat on the grass, keeping my posture low, non-threatening. For minutes, we simply stared at each other. The silence was heavy, charged with anticipation. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, one careful hoof at a time. Closer, closer. My heart raced. Every fiber of me wanted to leap forward, to celebrate, but I knew patience was everything. She was the one in control of this moment. Tentatively, I extended my hand toward her neck. Her ears flicked back, a warning, but she didn't retreat. My fingers hovered, trembling slightly, over the warm curve of her mane. Then the most incredible thing happened. She allowed the touch. Just the edge of my hand on her mane. The shiver that ran through her body wasn't fear. It was awareness, recognition, acceptance. My pulse hammered as I whispered softly, barely audible over the soft wind. You're safe. You're safe here. From that touch, a new rhythm emerged. I stroked slowly, deliberately, letting her guide the pace. She shifted her weight, leaning slightly into my hand. My eyes blurred with emotion. It was more than trust. It was surrender, a choice to allow someone else into her world without fear. And in that surrender, I felt my own walls crumble, my own past regrets, losses, and failures dissolving into the sunlight. Over the next hour, small victories stacked upon each other. She allowed me to brush her coat, to run a gentle hand along her flank. Every touch was a conversation, a negotiation of respect and care. I spoke to her softly, each word measured, carrying meaning in tone, not content. And she responded, not with obedience, but with a partnership, an unspoken agreement that we were no longer adversaries in a struggle for control. Then came the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated, the first attempt at leading her. I held the lead rope lightly, letting her see it, smell it, consider it. She hesitated, ears rotating, muscles tensed. But instead of pulling away, she moved forward, slowly, matching each step I took. My voice remained calm, steady, guiding without forcing. The phantom, the untamable, the legendary Mustang of the valley, allowed herself to be led. My chest swelled with pride, but more than that, with awe. This was not dominance. It was trust, pure and unbroken. It wasn't perfect. She pulled slightly, tested boundaries, turned her head sharply as if to remind me she could go at any moment. And I let her. Every resistance became a dialogue, every hesitation a chance to deepen understanding. Slowly, gradually, step by step, we moved together through the valley. The wind carried her mane like a banner, golden sunlight catching every strand. Birds scattered in the distance, crows cawing their astonishment, and I realized the valley itself seemed to exhale in wonder. In those moments, I thought about the stories I'd heard of wild horses and humans, tales of fear, struggle, and sometimes heartbreak. But what I was experiencing transcended all of that. There was no taming here, no breaking of spirit, no domination. There was only respect, empathy, and the raw, breathtaking beauty of two beings learning to share a world. The phantom had challenged me, tested me, and now she had chosen to meet me halfway. As we returned to the paddock, she followed willingly, head slightly lowered, ears relaxed, body language open. I let her go once we reached familiar ground, not out of fear, but out of respect for her autonomy. She nuzzled my hand briefly before stepping away, grazing peacefully. My heart soared. The breakthrough was real, not a fleeting moment, but the start of a lasting connection. That evening, sitting by the fire at the ranch, I strummed the guitar again, reflecting on the journey. Every note carried the story of the valley, the storm, the panic, the fear, and finally, the trust. I whispered to the camera, voice hushed but confident. Sometimes, it isn't the big leaps that matter, it's the smallest gestures, the quietest whispers, the courage to stay when fear screams the loudest. The phantom watched from the paddock, silhouetted against the dying light, muscles relaxed, eyes soft and aware. The legendary Mustang, feared and untouchable for years, had allowed herself to be seen, to be known, and to trust. And in that moment, I understood that this story wasn't just about a horse. It was about connection, patience, and the extraordinary power of empathy. Tomorrow we would go further. Grooming, leading beyond the paddock, perhaps even riding, but those challenges would come later. Tonight, the valley held only quiet, only trust, only wonder. And as I captured the moment for viewers, I felt a surge of gratitude for the valley, for her courage, and for the invisible thread that had connected our hearts through music, patience, and unwavering presence. The phantom lifted her head, ears flicking toward the last lingering notes of my guitar. She stepped closer to the fence, and for a heartbeat, the world held still. Then she nuzzled the wood lightly, a gentle, almost imperceptible gesture, but to me, it was monumental. She had chosen me, and I had chosen her. The sun rose over the valley like a promise. Light spilled over the hills, glinting off dew-covered grass and casting long, golden shadows across the paddock. The phantom stood at the edge, mane flowing, muscles relaxed yet full of latent power, her eyes bright with curiosity and trust. Today, everything we had worked for would be tested, celebrated, and solidified. I approached her slowly, keeping my posture low and my movements deliberate. The lead rope was in my hand, and the guitar rested against my back, notes from yesterday's song still humming in my memory. For a moment, we simply regarded each other, an understanding passing silently between us. She had chosen me, now it was time to step fully into partnership. I called softly, my voice steady, carrying warmth and reassurance. She lifted her head, ears flicking forward. With a single, graceful movement, she stepped toward me, letting me clip the lead rope gently onto her halter. There was no resistance, only awareness, an intelligent, deliberate choice to trust. My chest swelled with emotion. I whispered almost to myself, "We did it. We really did it." We walked together through the paddock at first, her steps measured, mine cautious, both of us finding rhythm in each other. She tested me occasionally, a sudden glance, a small prance, but always returned to my side, confirming the bond that had been forged through weeks of patience, persistence, and music. Every step reinforced the trust that had once seemed impossible, a fragile connection now unbreakable. By midday, we ventured beyond the paddock, into the open valley. The wind swept across the grasses, carrying the scent of pine and earth. She moved with confidence now, yet remained aware, ears attuned to my presence. I let her lead at times, let her choose the pace, the direction. It was not control I sought, but harmony. And in that harmony, I felt something profound. A sense of awe, a recognition that this wild, untamed creature and I were creating something rare and beautiful together. Later, I brought out the grooming brush. My hands were steady, voice calm. She allowed me to run it along her neck, her flank, her hindquarters. There was no flinch, no hesitation, only acceptance. A soft nuzzle here, a gentle leaning into my touch there. Every gesture carried trust and gratitude, unspoken but deeply felt. I stroked her mane, letting the wind lift strands like ribbons in the sunlight. I realized in that moment that the phantom's wildness had never been a flaw. It had been her strength, her story, her heart. And now, she was sharing it with me. The camera captured everything, But even it could not fully convey the magic of that moment, the valley's golden light, the phantom's shimmering coat, the quiet symphony of wind, hooves, and heartbeats in perfect resonance. I spoke softly to the viewers, letting the message flow naturally. Sometimes, connection is quiet. Sometimes, it's a whisper, a note, a gesture. But when it happens, it changes everything. And then came the final test I had been anticipating for weeks, the saddle. Not to ride fully, not yet, but to allow her to feel the weight and presence of human partnership in a new way. My hands trembled slightly as I laid the pad across her back. She shifted her weight, muscles rippling beneath her coat, but did not bolt. I rested my palm lightly on her neck, reassuring, steady, calm. Slowly, carefully, I secured the girth. She remained still, attentive, her trust unwavering. My heart leapt. We walked together once more, this time with the saddle in place. She moved with elegance, confidence, and a quiet pride. It was as if she understood not only the presence of human companionship, but the depth of choice she had exercised in allowing it. Every step was a celebration, a victory not of control, but of respect, empathy, and mutual understanding. By evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, we returned to the paddock. The phantom grazed peacefully, tail swishing, ears flicking contentedly. I sat nearby with my guitar, strumming soft, reflective chords. She lifted her head occasionally, listening, acknowledging, perhaps even appreciating the song that had started it all. The valley was quiet, serene, and yet alive with the memory of a story that would linger forever, the story of fear, patience, trust, and connection. Looking into her eyes, I understood that this journey had changed me as much as it had changed her. The wildest Mustang in the valley had not only allowed herself to trust, she had reminded me of the power of empathy, the importance of patience, and the magic that can emerge when two souls meet without pretense, without fear, and with mutual respect. As the camera panned back, capturing the valley in its full splendor, I whispered my closing thought to the viewers. Remember, the smallest gestures, the softest whispers, the gentle songs, can transform even the wildest hearts. If this story touched you, share it, subscribe, and keep believing in the power of patience, trust, and love. The phantom nuzzled the fence one last time, then turned toward the distant hills, ears alert, muscles relaxed, free yet willing to remain by my side. She had taught me something I will never forget, that true connection is not about possession or control, but about respect, patience, and allowing space for trust to grow. And in that golden light, in the quiet majesty of the valley, we both understood, some bonds are forged not in force, but in whispers, melodies, and the courage to stay when fear is loudest. The wildest Mustang in the valley had been tamed, not in body, but in spirit, and I was forever grateful to witness it.